Cole Hart was not the kind of man people noticed. He did not wear a uniform with bright colors or carry a weapon on his belt. He did not sit in the upper decks where the lights were clean and the air smelled like something expensive. He lived and worked in the lower decks of Valdres Cross, where the ceilings were low, the pipes were loud, and the floor always had a faint layer of grease no matter how many times you wiped it down. The lower decks were not pretty, but they were honest, and Cole liked honest things. His shop had no fancy sign outside. Just a flat metal plate bolted above the door with 2 words scratched into it, Cole's Repairs. The letters were a little uneven because he had done it himself with an old engraving tool on a slow night 3 years ago. He had meant to fix the spacing. He never got around to it. That felt right somehow. A repair shop run by a man who had crooked letters on his own sign. It told people exactly what kind of place this was: real, imperfect, and useful. Inside, the shop was small but organized in the way only someone who truly understood their work could manage. Every tool had a spot. Every part had a box. The shelves along the back wall held hundreds of components sorted by size and type, each one labeled in Cole's neat handwriting. There were mechanical arms from service drones, cracked power cells waiting to be rebuilt, sensor units with burnt wiring, and communication devices that had been dropped one too many times. Some of them had been sitting there for months. Cole never threw anything away. In his experience, the moment you threw something away was the exact moment someone walked in needing it. He had one assistant, a young insectoid alien named Pip, who was small even by the standards of his own species and spoke very little but worked with impressive focus. Pip handled the front counter on busy mornings and kept the parts shelves organized. Cole handled everything that required actual repair. They had worked together for 2 years and had never once argued, mostly because neither of them was the arguing type. It was a slow afternoon when it happened. Cole was at his main workbench, bent over a cracked navigation panel from a mid-range cargo ship. The owner had dropped it off that morning with the kind of desperate expression that told Cole it was needed back fast. Cole was taking his time anyway. Rushing a navigation panel was how you ended up with a ship that thought it was somewhere it was not, and that kind of mistake had consequences. He had a small lamp pulled close, a fine-tipped tool in his right hand, and a cup of tea going cold beside his elbow. Pip was reorganizing the back shelves and making very little noise doing it. The station outside the shop was its usual self, distant sounds of cargo being moved, the hum of ventilation systems, voices in half a dozen languages drifting past the open doorway. Cole had learned to hear all of it without really listening. It was background. It was normal. Then something changed. It was not a loud sound. It was actually the opposite, a very small sound just at the edge of what Cole could hear. A soft, broken kind of noise. Like something trying very hard not to cry and not quite managing it. Cole looked up from the navigation panel. Standing just inside the doorway of his shop was the smallest dragon he had ever seen. Cole had seen Veiltheri before, of course. Everyone on Valdres Cross had. They were hard to miss, enormous, scaled creatures with long necks and wings folded tight against their backs, moving through the upper decks with the slow, deliberate confidence of beings who had never once in their entire history been told to hurry up for anyone. The adults were impressive in a way that made most other species instinctively move out of their path. Not out of rudeness. Just out of a deep biological understanding that some things were very large and you should give them room. But this was not an adult. This was a hatchling, barely knee-height on Cole, with scales the color of pale copper that caught the light in small bright flickers when he moved. His wings were too big for his body in the way that young things often had parts that had not quite caught up to each other yet. His tail curled and uncurled against the floor in short, anxious movements. His golden eyes were enormous and very wet and darting around the shop with the particular panic of a small creature who had no idea where it was and was only just now realizing how much trouble that was. In his front claws, held against his chest like it was the most important thing in the world, was a toy. It was a small carved replica of a Veiltheri warship, the kind Cole had seen in pictures, long and angular with swept-back fins and a row of tiny cannons along each side. At some point it had been beautiful. Someone had painted it in deep blue and gold, with markings along the hull that were clearly meant to be significant. But it was broken now. The front section had snapped clean off and was being held in place only by the hatchling's careful grip. One of the fins was bent. The paint was worn thin in the places where small claws had held it again and again over a long time. The hatchling made that sound again, the small, broken one, and his grip on the toy tightened. Cole set down his tool. He did not stand up quickly. He did not call out or move fast or make any sudden noise. He had never worked with Veiltheri hatchlings before, but he had worked with frightened things before, Young animals, scared children of a dozen different species who had wandered into the shop with a broken something and a great deal of worry, and he had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do with a frightened creature was move like you were in a hurry. He pushed back his stool slowly and turned to face the hatchling fully. Then he lowered himself, down off the stool, down onto one knee on the shop floor, bringing himself below the hatchling's eye level. He rested his arms across his knee and said nothing for a moment. Just looked. Not staring. Just present. The hatchling froze. Those golden eyes fixed on Cole with an intensity that was equal parts fear and desperate hope. The tail stopped moving. The small copper-scaled body went completely still. Cole kept his voice low and easy, the way he talked to himself when he was working through a difficult repair, calm and unhurried, like there was nowhere else to be and no reason to rush anything. "Hey there," he said. "You lost." The hatchling did not answer. Cole had not really expected him to. He did not push. He just let the words sit in the air like something warm. After a long moment, the hatchling took one small step forward. Then another. Then he stopped again, watching Cole's face very carefully for any sign that this was a mistake. Cole did not move. He just waited. The hatchling came the rest of the way across the shop floor in a short, careful walk, stopped directly in front of Cole's knee, and held out the broken toy. The front section slipped a little in his grip as he held it out, and the hatchling made a sharp distressed sound and grabbed it back fast, pressing it to his chest again with wide eyes like he thought Cole might have judged him for almost dropping it. "It's all right," Cole said quietly. "I've got you. Let me see." He held out both hands, open, flat, no tools, no rush, and waited. The hatchling looked at Cole's hands. Looked at his face. Looked at the hands again. Then, with the very specific trust of a small creature who has run out of other options and has decided, against all sensible judgment, to believe in a stranger, he placed the broken toy carefully into Cole's open palms. Cole looked at it properly. The break was clean. The fin was bent but not cracked. The paint markings on the hull were Veiltheri script, old style from the look of it. This toy was not new. This toy had been held and carried and loved for a long time by someone small who did not have many things that were entirely their own. Cole understood broken things. He understood what they meant to the people who brought them to him. He looked up at the hatchling who was watching him with those huge golden eyes, tail curled tight, barely breathing. "I can fix this," Cole said simply. And he got to work. Cole did not rush. That was the first thing anyone who knew him would tell you about the way he worked. He did not rush. Not because he was slow or careless, but because he had learned early in his life that the fastest way to ruin something delicate was to treat it like it was not delicate. Speed was for simple jobs. Simple jobs were easy to find. The ones that mattered, the ones people brought to him with careful hands and worried eyes, those needed something different. Those needed patience. He carried the broken toy to his main workbench and set it down under the bright lamp. The hatchling followed him, staying close but not too close, watching from just behind Cole's shoulder with those wide golden eyes tracking every movement. Cole could hear the soft sound of small claws on the floor each time the hatchling shifted his weight. He did not tell the hatchling to step back or wait somewhere else. He simply let him stay. Sometimes the best thing you could do for a worried creature was let it watch you work. Watching gave it something to hold on to. Cole examined the break first. The front section of the toy warship had snapped along a thin joint, cleanly, which was actually good news. A clean break was easier than a shattered one. He turned it over carefully in his fingers, checking the edges, looking at how the two pieces fit together. They matched well. No missing fragments. No crumbling. Just a straight separation that needed to be closed properly and given time to set. He reached for his bonding compound, a small gray tube near the back of his tool tray, the kind he used for delicate work where too much pressure would cause more damage than the original break. He applied a very thin line along one edge, held the two pieces together with a steadiness that came from years of doing exactly this kind of thing, and then held it still. He counted quietly in his head. Not out loud. Just in his mind, the way he always did when he was waiting for something to set. It was a habit he had developed so long ago he could not remember starting it. The hatchling leaned in slightly, watching the join. Cole glanced sideways at him without turning his head. The little dragon's nose was very close to the toy now, and his expression was one of such concentrated hope that it was almost difficult to look at directly. Cole returned his eyes to the work. "Almost there," he said softly. Not to explain. Just to fill the silence with something calm. When he was satisfied the bond had taken, he set the warship down gently and moved to the bent fin. This required a different approach. Bonding compound was no help here, the fin needed to be reshaped. He found a small forming tool in the second drawer of his bench and worked the bent metal back by degrees, slowly, applying pressure in tiny increments and checking the angle after each one. Too fast and the fin would crack. Too much force in one place and it would weaken the joint. He went carefully, checking, adjusting, checking again. The hatchling sat down on the floor beside the workbench leg. Not curled up, just sitting, tail wrapped around his feet, watching. The desperate tension in his small body had not disappeared entirely, but it had softened. He was no longer trembling. Cole noticed that. He did not say anything about it. He just kept working. The fin came right after a few minutes. He held the toy at arm's length, turned it slowly under the lamp and checked everything one more time. The bond on the front section was holding cleanly. The fin was straight. The hull was intact. The toy was whole. But Cole was not finished. He set the warship down and opened the small wooden box at the corner of his bench. The one Pip always moved when reorganizing and Cole always moved back. Inside were his touch-up pigments, the ones he used when a repair job needed its surface restored. He had collected them slowly over years, a small collection of colors in tiny sealed containers, enough to match most things that came through his shop. He found the deep blue first. Then the gold. He looked at the original paintwork on the hull under the lamp, the Veilfairy script markings, the line detail along the fins, the color pattern across the bow. He looked at it for a long time, memorizing it. Then he picked up the finest brush he owned, the one with only a few hairs at its tip, and he began. This part took the longest. He was not just filling in scratches. He was following the original artist's work, trying to understand what hand had painted this toy first, what decisions they had made about where each line should go and how thick it should be. It was a kind of conversation with someone he had never met. He found it interesting in the quiet way that most of his work was interesting. Not exciting, not dramatic, just deeply engaging in a way that made the rest of the world very easy to ignore. At some point during this part of the work, the hatchling stood up and came to stand beside Cole's arm, watching the brush move. Cole was aware of the warmth of the small body beside him. He kept his arm steady. When he finally set the brush down and leaned back, the toy warship sitting under the lamp looked like something that had never been broken at all. The blue was deep and even. The gold markings ran clean along the hull. The script caught the light the way old paint does when it has been treated with care. Cole looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the hatchling. The hatchling was staring at the toy with an expression that had no easy name. It was somewhere between disbelief and something much larger and quieter than that. His golden eyes moved over every detail slowly, like he was checking each one to make sure it was real. Cole picked the toy up carefully and held it out. The hatchling reached for it, then stopped, looked at Cole's face quickly as if making sure this was actually allowed. "Go on," Cole said. The hatchling took it. He held it in both front claws and turned it over slowly, examining it the way Cole had examined it, with complete attention and great care. Then he made a sound. It was not crying and it was not quite laughing. It was something between the two that Cole had never heard before from any species but that he understood immediately anyway because some sounds do not need translation. Cole stood up from his stool, stretched his back and looked around the shop. It was getting into the later part of the afternoon. He had not eaten since morning. He went to the small shelf near the back wall where he kept his lunch on work days, a wrapped cloth package with whatever he had put together that morning. Today it was flatbread, some sliced cold protein, and a small container of pickled vegetables that he was fairly sure only he liked but always packed anyway out of habit. He brought it to the workbench, unwrapped it and broke the flatbread into 2 pieces. He set one piece on the clean section of the bench in front of the hatchling without saying anything about it. Just placed it there. Then he began eating his own portion. The hatchling looked at the flatbread. Looked at Cole. Looked at the flatbread again. Then he picked it up and ate it in 2 bites with the focused enthusiasm of a small creature who had apparently been too anxious to notice it was hungry until just now. Cole hid his smile behind his own piece of flatbread. They ate together in comfortable silence for a little while. Cole offered the cold protein. The hatchling accepted it immediately with zero hesitation, which Cole found funny in a quiet way. He left the pickled vegetables where they were. Some things were not worth testing. When they were done, Cole wrapped up what was left and looked at the hatchling properly. "All right," he said. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He came around the bench, and the hatchling fell into step beside him without being asked. The toy warship held carefully against his chest, head tilted up to watch Cole's face as they walked. Cole kept his pace slow. They moved through the lower deck corridor together, past cargo loaders and busy workers and aliens of a dozen varieties who glanced at them and then looked away, because strange combinations of species walking together were not unusual on Valdres Cross. The station security post was 3 corridors over. Cole brought the hatchling all the way to the desk, explained to the officer that the little one had come into his shop alone, and waited until the officer confirmed that a search had already been raised for a missing Veiltheri child. Cole crouched down in front of the hatchling one more time. The hatchling looked at him. Then, carefully and deliberately, he pressed one small claw tip to the repaired warship and then to Cole's hand. A small gesture. A clear one. Cole nodded. "Take care of it," he said. Then he stood, put his hands in his pockets and walked back toward his shop. He did not see the figure standing in the deep shadow of the corridor junction across from the security post, enormous, still, wrapped in a dark traveling cloak. He did not see the way that figure watched him walk away with an expression that was unreadable and very, very attentive. He did not know he had been watched from the moment the hatchling walked into his shop. He did not know the name of the creature watching him now. He did not know that what had just happened in his small, low-ceilinged repair shop in the lower decks of Valdres Cross would one day matter more than anything he had ever fixed in his life. Cole walked back to his shop, picked up his tools and finished the navigation panel. 7 years had passed since the afternoon a small copper-scaled hatchling had wandered into Cole's shop with a broken toy and a great deal of fear. 7 years was a long time on Valdres Cross. The station had changed in the ways that busy places always change. A new cargo wing had been added to the east side, 2 of the older food stalls in the lower market had closed and been replaced by different ones, and the ventilation system on Deck 4 had finally been replaced after making a sound like a dying engine for longer than anyone could remember. Small changes. The kind that happen so gradually you only notice them when you stop and think back. Cole's shop had changed too. Not dramatically, but enough. The sign above the door was the same. Cole's Repairs, letters still slightly uneven, but the shop itself was a little wider now. He had taken on the empty storage unit next door 2 years ago when the previous tenant moved out, knocked through the shared wall, and gained enough space to add a second workbench and a proper parts storage system along the new wall. He had 2 assistants now. Pip was still there, still quiet, still reorganizing the shelves with dedicated focus. The second assistant was a young human named Fun, barely 18, who had walked in one morning asking for work and turned out to have surprisingly good hands for fine repair. Cole had kept him on. The reputation of the shop had grown in the quiet way that good work tends to grow, not through advertising or loud recommendation, but through the simple chain of one satisfied customer mentioning the place to another. People came from the upper decks now sometimes, which would have seemed unlikely 7 years ago. Cole treated them the same way he treated everyone else, which some of them seemed surprised by and others seemed relieved by. He was at his first workbench on a Tuesday afternoon, working on a cracked housing unit from a long-range scanning device, when the door opened. Cole did not look up immediately. The door opened many times a day. He had learned to finish the thought he was on before looking up, because the scanning device housing had 3 connected components that needed to be held in alignment while he worked, and letting his attention break at the wrong moment would mean starting that section over. He finished the alignment, locked it in place with 2 small clamps and then looked up. The young Veiltheri standing inside the doorway was tall, not adult tall but moving in that direction. Cole put his age somewhere in the range that would be called adolescent in most species, though with Veiltheri it was harder to judge precisely. His scales were a deep copper color, darker than a hatchling's, with a faint metallic quality that caught the light differently depending on the angle. His wings were folded neatly against his back. His posture was straight without being stiff. His eyes were gold, sharp and calm, and taking in the shop with a slow, thorough attention that reminded Cole of the way experienced engineers looked at an unfamiliar piece of equipment. Not impressed, not unimpressed. Just looking carefully and noting everything. He was carrying something. Both hands. The Veiltheri had a secondary pair of forward limbs that functioned similarly to human arms, were holding a sphere about the size of a large melon. It was old. Cole could tell that from across the shop. Old things had a particular quality to them, a kind of density in the way they sat in the light, like they were carrying the weight of all the time they had been through. The sphere was made of dark metal with inlaid sections of a lighter material, bone or pale stone. Cole could not tell from here, and even from a distance he could see that the inlaid sections were not sitting correctly. Some of them had shifted. The sphere had the look of something whose internal arrangement had been disturbed. Cole set down his tool and gave the young Veiltheri his full attention. "Morning," Cole said. "Good morning," the young dragon replied. His common tongue was excellent, clean and precise, with only a very faint trace of the formal cadence that most Veiltheri carried when speaking languages that were not their own. He crossed the shop floor and placed the sphere on the counter with great care, both hands lowering it slowly until it rested on the padded surface Cole kept there for fragile items. Then he stepped back slightly and waited. Cole came around from behind the workbench and looked at it. Up close, the sphere was even older than it had appeared from across the room. The dark metal of the outer casing had the kind of deep, uneven tone that only comes from centuries of careful handling. Not neglect, not damage, just time and use. The inlaid sections were definitely bone, pale and smooth, carved with markings that Cole recognized as navigational script, though an older form than he usually saw. A compass sphere. He had read about them but never held one. He did not touch it yet. He looked first, bending slightly at the waist to examine it from different angles. 3 of the inlaid bone sections had shifted out of their correct positions. One had a hairline crack running along its edge, old, not recent, already stable. The mechanism that allowed the sphere to rotate had seized in one axis, which explained why the sections had shifted. If the sphere could not move the way it was designed to, the internal components had nowhere to go when the calibration drifted. Cole straightened up and looked at the young Veiltheri. Compass sphere, he said. Navigational. Old one. Yes, the young dragon said. It has not worked correctly for some time. How long? Several years. It was in storage before that. Cole nodded slowly. The bone sections have shifted. 3 of them are out of position. One has an old crack. That is stable, nothing new. The rotation mechanism is seized, probably the primary cause of everything else. He paused. Can I ask where it came from? It belonged to my family, the young Veiltheri said. It is old. I can see that. Cole looked at it again. This kind of work takes time. I would need to open the casing, free the rotation mechanism, and reset the bone sections into their correct positions without stressing the crack further. If I rush it, I risk the crack widening. I will not rush it. I would not want you to, the young dragon said. Cole named a price. It was fair, not cheap because the work was genuinely difficult and the object was genuinely valuable, but not inflated either. He had no reason to inflate it. Cole charged for the work, not for what he thought someone could pay. The young Veiltheri considered the number for a moment, then nodded. Cole took a small job card from the drawer and began writing down the details. Name? He asked, pen ready. There was a very brief pause. Soren, the young dragon said. Cole wrote it down without looking up. It was not an unusual name. He filed it away the same way he filed all customer names, useful information, nothing more. I will send a message to the contact frequency you give me when it is ready. Could be 3 days, could be 5. Depends what I find when I open the casing. That is acceptable, Soren said. He gave a contact frequency and Cole wrote that down too. Then instead of leaving, Soren remained at the counter. Cole glanced up. Can I ask you something? Soren said. Go ahead. How long have you worked here? Cole thought about it. About 11 years in this shop. Longer than that doing repair work in general. Do you enjoy it? It was not the kind of question customers usually asked. Cole considered it properly rather than giving a quick answer, because it deserved a proper answer. Yes, he said. I like broken things. Not because they are broken. Because there is always a reason they broke and finding the reason is interesting. And fixing them properly, not just making them look fixed but actually making them work the way they were supposed to, that is satisfying in a way that is hard to explain. Soren was quiet for a moment. Do you remember every repair you have done? Cole almost smiled. No. Not even close. Too many. Do you remember the ones that mattered? Cole looked at him. It was an odd question. Not unfriendly. Just odd. Some of them, he said honestly. The ones that were unusual for some reason. Or the ones where the person who brought it in was, he paused, choosing his words, really needed it fixed. Soren looked at him for a moment with those calm gold eyes. Then he nodded once as if Cole had confirmed something he had already suspected. I will wait for your message, he said. He turned and walked toward the door with that same straight, unhurried posture. Cole watched him go, holding the job card in one hand, with a faint and formless sense that something had just happened that he had not quite understood. At the doorway, Soren stopped. He did not turn around fully. He spoke toward the door, his voice quiet and even. You helped me once before, he said. You did not know it mattered. Pause. It did. Then he walked out. Cole stood at the counter for a moment after he was gone, job card in hand, looking at the empty doorway. He turned the words over in his mind, examined them the way he examined unfamiliar components, carefully from different angles, trying to find where they connected to something he already knew. He could not place it. He looked down at the job card in his hand. The name he had written there. Soren. He looked at the compass sphere sitting on the padded counter, old and quiet and waiting. Then he set the card in the active jobs slot, picked up the sphere with both hands, carried it carefully to his workbench and got to work. The Veiltheri diplomatic crew arrived at Valdres Cross on a Wednesday evening without any warning. That was the first unusual thing. Diplomatic arrivals on the station were normally announced at least a day in advance. There were protocols, arrival registrations, deck clearances that needed to be arranged. Unannounced arrivals of any kind created extra work for the station administration. Unannounced arrivals from a species as significant as the Veiltheri created a great deal of extra work and a certain amount of quiet panic in the offices responsible for managing it. The second unusual thing was the speed with which someone from that crew found their way to Cole's shop. It was early evening. Cole was finishing up for the day, covering the workbenches, putting tools back in their places, checking the job list for tomorrow. Pip had already left. Fun was sweeping the back section of the shop with the slightly distracted energy of someone whose mind was already at home. Cole was about to tell him to leave the rest and go when the door opened and a Veiltheri in a plain gray travel garment stepped inside. The Veiltheri was not large by the standards of the species. Medium height, dark green scales, moving with the clipped purposefulness of someone on a tight schedule with no patience for anything that was not directly useful. He looked around the shop once, quickly, and then looked at Cole. "You are the repairman," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Cole said. The Veiltheri reached into the travel case he was carrying and placed an object on the counter. Cole looked at it. It was a communication device, but not a standard one. Standard communication devices had a recognizable shape, a kind of universal design logic that most species had converged on over centuries of building similar technology. This one was Veiltheri built, which meant it was older in its design philosophy and more complex in its construction than most things Cole worked on. It was about the length of his forearm, dark casing, with a series of external nodes along one side that were clearly meant to interface with larger systems. Two of the nodes were visibly damaged, one bent, one with a cracked housing. The main casing had a deep stress fracture running along the bottom edge. "It stopped functioning during transit," the Veiltheri said. "It needs to work. We need it before tomorrow morning." Cole picked it up carefully and turned it over in his hands. He pressed the activation point. Nothing happened. He examined the stress fracture, then the damaged nodes, then turned it over again and looked at the connection port on the back. "What does it carry?" Cole asked. "Encrypted communications. The content is not your concern. The function is." Cole accepted that without argument. What was inside a device was rarely his business. Making the device work was his business. "I will need to open it." "Open it. If there is damage inside beyond what I can see from here, the timeline may not be possible." The Veiltheri's expression did not change. "Make it possible." Cole looked at him steadily. "I will do what the device allows me to do. I will not promise you something I cannot deliver. If the internal damage is manageable, you will have it before morning. If it is worse than it looks from the outside, I will tell you exactly what the situation is as soon as I know." There was a pause. The Veiltheri studied him for a moment with the particular look of someone deciding whether to push back. Then he gave a short nod. "Fair." He left a contact frequency, picked up the travel case and walked out. Finn had stopped sweeping at some point during the conversation and was standing very still near the back wall holding the broom. He looked at Cole with wide eyes. "Go home," Cole said. He was already carrying the device to the workbench. Cole worked alone. He opened the casing carefully, using a set of fine-edged tools along the stress fracture line rather than the standard access points, because the fracture had warped the casing enough that the standard points would not cooperate. It took 20 minutes just to get it open without causing additional damage. He did not rush it. Inside was better and worse than he had expected. Better because the core communication components were intact. The primary transmitter, the encryption module, the frequency calibration unit. None of those were damaged. Worse because the impact that had cracked the external nodes had sent a force wave through the internal connection architecture, and 3 of the internal connector lines had sheared. They were very thin lines. The kind of precision wiring that Veiltheri engineering favored, elegant and efficient and deeply unforgiving of any repair attempt that was not equally precise. Cole sat back for a moment and looked at it. Then he got up, went to the parts shelves and began looking for what he needed. He did not have Veiltheri connector lines. Those were specialist components. But he had worked with enough varied technology over the years to know that what you needed and what would work were not always the same thing. He found a spool of ultrafine conductive filament he had salvaged from a disassembled sensor array 8 months ago and kept because it had seemed like something he would need eventually. He held it next to one of the sheared lines under the lamp. The gauge was close. Not identical. Clothes. Clothes was something he could work with. The station grew quiet around him as the hours moved forward. The lower decks never went fully silent. There was always the hum of the ventilation, the distant sounds of the night cargo crews, but they got quieter, and the quality of the quiet changed in a way Cole had always found easier to work in. Fewer interruptions. Fewer footsteps past the door. Just him and the lamp and the device in the work. He was deep into the third connector line, hands perfectly steady when he heard the door. He did not look up. He was at a point that did not allow for looking up. "Shop is closed," he said without changing the focus of his attention. "I know," said a voice he recognized. Cole finished the connection he was on, set the tool down and looked up. Soren stood inside the doorway. He was not in the travel garments he had worn when he collected the compass sphere. That job had been completed and picked up 4 days ago. Tonight he was dressed simply, dark clothing, no markers of rank or family. He looked younger somehow without the formal posture he had carried in the shop before. Or perhaps it was just the late hour, which had a way of taking the formal edges off most people. "The compass sphere works well," Soren said. "Better than it has in years." "Good," Cole said. "That is what it was supposed to do." Soren looked at the device on the workbench, the opened casing, the lamp pulled close, the tools laid out in their working arrangement. He did not ask what it was. He came and sat on the low stool near the end of the bench, the one Cole kept there for customers who needed to wait, and he was quiet for a moment. Cole picked up his tool and went back to work. He did not mind the company. The shop felt different with someone else in it, not worse, just different. A different kind of quiet. "It is late to be working," Soren said. "Someone needs it by morning." "And you will have it ready?" "I will have it ready." Soren watched him work for a while without speaking. Cole found he did not mind being watched. There was nothing in Soren's observation that felt critical or impatient. It was the same quality of attention he had shown in the shop when he was younger, simply watching with genuine interest, the way someone watches a thing they find worth understanding. "Do you always take the jobs that others cannot do in time?" Soren asked eventually. Cole considered the question while keeping his hands steady. "I take the jobs that need doing. The timing is usually someone else's emergency, not mine. But emergencies are real. If I can help with one, I will. Even at this hour. The hour does not change whether the work is worth doing." Soren was quiet again for a moment. When he spoke next, his voice was slightly different, not the careful, measured tone of their earlier conversations. Something more direct. Something that had been sitting with him for a while. "I have been told many times that the way I think about things is a weakness," he said. "That caring about the wrong things, smaller things, things that do not make you stronger or richer or more powerful, is something to grow out of." He paused. "I have never been fully convinced of that. But I have also never had a good answer for the people who say it." Cole did not stop working. But he heard every word. He was quiet for a moment, finishing a delicate section before he trusted himself to speak and work at the same time. "Something broken isn't worth less," he said simply. "It just needs the right hands." He set the tool down briefly and looked at the device. "A thing's value is not about its condition. It is about what it is. What it does. What it means to the person who needs it." He picked the tool back up. "Caring about something is not a weakness. It is how you know what is worth fixing." The shop was very quiet after that. Soren sat with those words for a long time, not speaking while Cole worked. At some point he said good night and left. Cole barely registered it. He was close to the end now, the final connector line, and his whole mind was on the work. He finished at 10 minutes past 2 in the morning. He tested the device 3 times. It worked perfectly each time, clean signal, full encryption module response, all nodes functional. He closed the casing, secured it, and left a message for the contact frequency the Veil Theory envoy had given him. Then he turned off the lamp, locked the shop, and went to sleep. In the morning, Cole arrived at the shop before Pip or Fun, the way he usually did. He unlocked the door, pushed it open, and was about to step inside when something caught his eye. He stopped. On the right side of his doorframe, carved into the metal cleanly and precisely, as if done by something very sharp and very controlled, was a symbol. It was small, maybe the size of his palm, but deeply cut and deliberate. The lines were complex, layered and interlocking in the way that Veil Theory script tended to be, but the overall shape was one he had seen before, in reference images and on formal documents that occasionally passed through the station. He stared at it for a long moment. He did not know exactly what it meant. But something about the weight of it, the care with which it had been made, the fact that it had appeared overnight on his door without a word, told him that it was significant in a way that went beyond anything he currently understood. He reached out and touched the edge of it with one finger. Then he went inside, put the kettle on, and waited for the day to begin. The news moved through Valdres Cross the way extraordinary things always move through busy places. Fast, in pieces, and slightly wrong in each retelling. It started on the upper docks at mid-morning, when 3 Veiltheri escort ships entered the station's docking corridor without a prior registration filing. That alone was enough to get people talking. Then the dock workers noticed the markings on the ships, not diplomatic gray, not the plain travel colors of a noble house making a quiet visit. These were deep crimson and gold. Old colors. The kind that had not been seen on Valdres Cross in living memory. By the time the information had traveled down through the deck levels, the story had already changed several times. Some people said it was a war fleet. Some said it was a trade delegation. One woman in the lower market told 3 different people with complete confidence that it was a funeral procession, though she could not explain where she had gotten that from. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everybody had an opinion about it, which was the normal state of affairs on a station of this size. Cole heard about it from Fun, who had heard about it from the food stall 2 corridors over, who had heard about it from someone on the mid-deck transit. Finn came into the shop with his eyes wide and the energy of someone carrying news they considered important. 3 Veiltheri ships, Finn said before he had even taken his jacket off. Crimson and gold markings. Nobody knows who it is. Somebody knows, Cole said without looking up from the power relay he was calibrating. They always know. They just haven't told the right people yet. Finn hung up his jacket and came to look over Cole's shoulder at the relay. Do you think it's political? Because of everything going on with the Veiltheri succession? Cole set down his calibration tool and looked at Finn. Where did you hear about that? Everyone's heard about it, Finn said, slightly defensive. It's not a secret. One of the senior nobles was in the upper market last week. People talk. Cole accepted this and went back to work. He was not particularly interested in Veiltheri politics. He was interested in the power relay, which had a calibration drift that was small enough to be invisible under normal testing but large enough to cause problems under sustained load. Finding it required patience and a particular kind of attention that did not leave much room for thinking about other things. The morning passed normally. Pip reorganized the connector parts shelf, which Cole noticed had been reorganized 3 times in the past 2 weeks, and chose not to comment on. 2 customers came in. One dropping off a cracked environmental sensor, one picking up a repaired data unit that had been ready since yesterday. Finn handled both of them at the front counter with the comfortable ease he had developed over the past year. It was just before midday when the lower deck went quiet. Not silent. The ventilation still hummed, the distant cargo sounds were still there, but the ordinary background noise of people moving and talking and going about their business dropped off in a way that was noticeable. Cole looked up from his bench. Through the front window of the shop he could see the corridor outside. People had stopped walking. Some were standing still, looking in the same direction, toward the far end of the corridor where it connected to the main deck thoroughfare. A few were stepping back toward the walls, not quickly, not in fear, but with the instinctive movement of beings making room for something large. Cole set down his tool. He came around the workbench, walked to the doorway and looked out. Lord Aldrich Dorn was walking through the lower deck corridor of Valdres Cross. Cole had seen important figures on the station before. Ambassadors, trading house leaders, a military admiral once who had moved through the upper decks with an escort of 12 and an atmosphere of consequence that cleared paths without anyone having to ask. He thought he understood what it looked like when someone significant moved through a space. He had not understood it until now. Lord Aldrich was immense in the way that the oldest Veiltheri were immense. Not just physically, though he was that too tall and broad with scales the color of aged bronze that carried the particular depth of something that had been through a great many years and a great many things. It was more than size. It was the quality of his presence, the way the air around him seemed to carry a different weight. He was not moving quickly. He was not moving slowly. He was moving with the absolute unhurried certainty of a being that had never once in its life needed to adjust its pace for anything around it. He had no escort. No guards flanking him, no attendants behind him. Just himself, walking through the lower decks of a trade station as if he had done it 1,000 times, though Cole was quite certain he had not. And he was walking directly toward Cole's shop. Cole stood in his doorway and watched this happen with the particular stillness of a man whose mind is working very fast while his body has decided, sensibly, not to move. Lord Aldrich stopped in front of the shop. He looked at the sign above the door, Cole's Repairs, letters slightly uneven, for a brief moment. Then he looked at Cole. Up close, his eyes were extraordinary. Deep amber, with a quality of accumulated attention in them that made Cole feel, in a way he could not quite explain, that he was being read the way he read damaged devices, thoroughly, without judgment, looking for what was actually there rather than what things appeared to be on the surface. Cole Hart, Lord Aldrich said. His voice was deep and even, with a resonance that seemed to come from somewhere further back than just his throat. Yes, Cole said. I would like to speak with you. Cole stepped back from the doorway. Come in. He heard Finn make a very quiet sound from somewhere behind him. He did not turn around. Finn, he said, keeping his voice normal. Take your lunch break. Finn took his lunch break immediately and with considerable speed. Pip, who had looked up from the shelves when Lord Aldrich entered and then looked back down at the shelves with the focused calm of someone who had decided that the best response to an extraordinary situation was to continue organizing connector parts, was given the same instruction. Pip left more slowly but left. Cole and Lord Aldrich were alone in the shop. Lord Aldrich looked around the shop with that same quality of unhurried attention he brought to everything. He looked at the workbenches, the shelves, the tools laid out in their places. He looked at the sign on the door from the inside. He looked at the mark carved into the doorframe, the royal protection symbol, for a moment. Then he looked at Cole. You do not know who I am, Lord Aldrich said. I know your name, Cole said. Lord Aldrich Dorn. I did not know what you looked like until today. But you know the symbol on your doorframe. I know it is significant. I do not know exactly what it means. Lord Aldrich regarded him. It means that this shop and everyone in it is under the protection of the Veiltheri ruling house. It was placed there by my hand. Cole absorbed this. Why? Because of what happened in this shop approximately 11 years ago, Lord Aldrich said. On an afternoon when a small hatchling wandered in here alone carrying a broken toy. The shop was very quiet. Cole looked at Lord Aldrich. Something was connecting in the back of his mind, pieces that had been separate for years suddenly finding their edges matched. The cloaked figure he had half noticed near the security post that evening, never fully registering. The young Veiltheri who had come back years later with a compass sphere and quiet questions. The words spoken at the door, you helped me once before. Soren, Cole said. My youngest son, Lord Aldrich said. Yes. He told Cole everything then, not quickly, not dramatically, but in the plain and measured way of someone stating facts they had carried for a long time and had decided the other person deserved to hear completely. He told Cole that he had followed Soren into the shop that afternoon and watched from the corridor the entire time. That he had watched Cole kneel down so as not to frighten a small child. That he had watched him repair the toy with care that went beyond what was required, repaint the markings by hand, share his own food without being asked. That he had watched Cole walk his son personally to the security post and leave without asking for anything. He told Cole that he had come back. Twice more, at least, watching from a distance. Watching Soren return to the shop with the compass sphere. Watching Cole treat his son like anyone else. Fairly, honestly, without performance. He told Cole that in Veiltheri culture, what he had witnessed that first afternoon was almost unthinkable. A member of a lesser species offering genuine, uncalculated kindness to a Veiltheri child. No angle. No awareness of who the child was. Just a man who saw something small and frightened and broken and chose, without thinking about it, to help. You showed my son something that day, Lord Aldrich said. He was very young. He did not have words for it then. He does now. He says you showed him that kindness was not something to be embarrassed about. That a strong person could choose to be gentle. He paused. He has carried that with him for 11 years. It shaped the way he thinks. The way he leads. The way he has prepared himself for what is coming. Cole said nothing. He was listening with everything he had. Soren will be named the next Dragon King, Lord Aldrich said. Not by default. By my deliberate choice. He is the right one. He is ready. His voice carried absolute conviction and something beneath it, the quieter, harder thing of a father who had watched his son be dismissed and underestimated for years and had waited with great patience for the moment to act. There will be opposition from the noble houses. There always is when the chosen successor is not the one the powerful expected. They will challenge his fitness. They will argue that his values make him unsuitable. He looked at Cole directly. I am asking you to stand before the noble assembly as a named witness. It is an ancient role in our culture. A named witness speaks to the character of the one being considered, not their bloodline, not their battle record, but who they are as a being. The assembly must hear it. It carries weight that political arguments cannot easily counter. Cole was quiet for a moment. I am a repairman in the lower decks, he said. I have no rank, no title, no history that means anything to a room full of Veiltheri nobles. No, Lord Aldrich agreed. I am no one special, Cole said. Lord Aldrich looked at him with those deep amber eyes. That, he said quietly, is precisely why I am asking you. The shop was still. Outside, the corridor had slowly returned to its normal sounds. Footsteps, voices, the distant machinery of a station going about its day. In here there was only the hum of the ventilation and the weight of what had just been said. Cole looked at his workbench. At his tools in their places. At the mark carved into his doorframe that he had touched with one finger on a quiet morning weeks ago and not understood. He thought about a small hatchling holding a broken toy with trembling claws. He thought about a young dragon who had come back and asked quiet questions and left with words that had stayed with Cole longer than he had admitted to himself. He looked at Lord Aldrich. All right, Cole said. I will do it. The hall was the largest space Cole had ever stood in. He had seen large spaces before, the main cargo bays of Valdres Cross, the open docking corridors where ships the size of buildings moved in and out with slow mechanical grace. He thought he understood large. But this was different. This was not large in the way that functional spaces were large. This was large in the way that only places built deliberately to make you feel small could be large. The ceiling was so high that the upper sections were lost in a kind of architectural darkness, with only faint lines of light running along the structural ribs to suggest where the roof actually was. The walls were dark stone, real stone, not synthetic panel, imported at what must have been extraordinary cost, carved with generations of Veiltheri history in deep relief. Figures in battle. Figures in council. Figures standing over things that had been defeated and things that had been built. And filling the floor of this hall, arranged in the curved rows of ancient seating that rose in tiers on both sides of the central floor, were the noble houses of the Veiltheri. Cole did not count them. He had the impression of scale rather than number, a great many enormous beings, scales in every shade that the species carried, from pale gold to deep black, all of them watching the central floor with the focused, unreadable attention of creatures who had been attending assemblies like this for longer than most civilizations had existed. Cole was standing on the central floor. He was wearing the cleanest clothes he owned, dark trousers, a plain gray jacket he had pressed carefully the night before in his small quarters on Valdres Cross. He had no ceremonial garment, no formal uniform, nothing that marked him as anything other than exactly what he was. A human. Unremarkable in height, in build, in every visible way. Standing in the center of a Veiltheri noble assembly like a single ordinary tool left on a workbench that was otherwise covered in ancient and priceless things. He could feel the attention of the room on him the way you feel weather, not as a single sensation but as a general condition of the air around you. Lord Aldrich stood to one side of the central floor, still and composed. Soren stood slightly behind his father, straight-backed and calm in a way that Cole recognized now, that particular stillness of someone who had learned to carry weight without showing it. Their eyes met briefly when Cole had entered. Soren gave him one small, steady nod. Cole had returned it. The opposition had already spoken. There had been two of them, senior representatives of noble houses whose names Cole had been given but could not pronounce, and they had made their case with the practiced fluency of beings who had been arguing in formal assemblies for decades. Their argument was clear and consistently returned to the same points. Soren was too soft. His values were shaped by exposure to lesser species. A king built on gentleness would not hold when strength was required. The Veiltheri needed a ruler forged from harder material. They had not been speaking to Cole during any of this. But he had listened carefully to every word, because understanding the argument he was standing against mattered more than his own comfort in that moment. Now it was his turn. The assembly official, a tall Veiltheri with silver-gray scales and the patient expression of someone who had overseen many of these proceedings, looked at Cole and said in careful common tongue, that the named witness could speak. Cole did not have notes. He had decided against notes. Notes were for things you were not sure you remembered. He was sure he remembered this. He looked at the assembly, not at one section, not at the floor, but at the room as a whole, the way he looked at a complex device before beginning work on it. Taking it in. Acknowledging it fully. Then he began to speak. He did not start with an argument. He did not start with credentials or context or any kind of formal opening. He started with the story the way it had actually happened, in the order it had actually happened, in plain words that anyone in any language could follow. He told them about a slow afternoon in a repair shop in the lower decks of a trade station. He told them about a small hatchling who had walked in alone, frightened, clutching a broken toy against his chest like it was the most important thing he owned. He described the hatchling the way he remembered him, the trembling claws, the wide golden eyes, the way his tail curled and uncurled against the floor in short anxious movements. He did not embellish it. He did not make it dramatic. He just described what he had seen clearly and honestly, and let the room make of it what it would. He told them about the repair. About kneeling down so as not to frighten the child. About working carefully and talking in a low voice and sharing his lunch and repainting the toy by hand. He told it simply, without any suggestion that these had been remarkable choices. They had not felt remarkable at the time. They had just felt like the right things to do when a small creature needed help. He told them about Soren coming back years later. Older, calm, asking quiet questions and listening carefully to the answers. About a young dragon who did not announce himself or use his name or his family or his position to get different treatment. Who came in like anyone else and was treated like anyone else and seemed, from everything Cole could observe, to prefer it that way. He paused there for a moment. The hall was very quiet. He looked at the section of seating where the opposition representatives sat. He spoke to them directly, not with hostility, just with the directness of someone who had decided there was no point in speaking to a room while avoiding the people whose minds he was actually trying to reach. I have heard the argument that gentleness is a weakness in a leader, he said. I work with broken things every day of my life. I have worked with them for most of my life. And I can tell you that the ones that break most easily are not the soft ones. They are the ones with no flexibility. The rigid ones. The ones that were built to be hard all the way through with no give anywhere. He let that sit for a moment. Strength that cannot bend is not strength. It is just brittleness waiting for the right pressure. He looked at the room again. Soren came into my shop 3 times over 11 years. He never told me who he was. He never used his family name to get better service or faster work or a lower price. He asked honest questions and listened to the answers and treated every person he encountered in my shop with the same straightforward respect. He did not perform kindness. He did not perform humility. He simply was those things consistently when there was nothing to be gained from it. He paused. In my experience, that is the only kind of character that is real. The kind that shows up when nobody important is watching. He stopped there. He did not add to it. He did not circle back and repeat the strongest points in case the room had missed them. He had said what he had come to say, and he trusted it to be enough, or he trusted that it would not be enough and that there was nothing more he could do about that. He stood quietly and waited. The silence that followed was the longest Cole had ever stood inside. It was not an empty silence. It was the kind that has weight and texture, the silence of a very large number of beings processing something at the same time, each in their own way. Cole could not read veil theory expressions well enough to know what that processing looked like from the outside. He just stood still and kept his breathing even and waited. It was one of the oldest nobles in the room who spoke first. A veil theory with scales so dark they were nearly black, sitting in the highest tier of seating on the left side, who had said nothing during the opposition's arguments and nothing during Cole's. His voice, when it came, was very deep and very slow and carried the particular authority of someone who speaks rarely and therefore is listened to completely when they do. He said 3 words in veil theory. Cole did not understand them. But he understood what happened after them. Because after those 3 words the opposition representatives were quiet. And Lord Aldrich stepped forward onto the central floor. And the assembly official raised the formal instrument of declaration. And the ancient words of the naming ceremony, which Cole had been given a translation of the night before and had read 3 times, began. Soren was named Dragon King. There was no explosion of noise. No dramatic roar of approval. The veil theory did not celebrate that way. What happened instead was a slow, collective sound, deep and resonant, coming from many throats at once. That was not quite a word and not quite music but was clearly and unmistakably an acknowledgement. An acceptance. The sound of a room full of ancient beings recognizing something as true. Cole stood on the central floor and listened to it and felt the sound move through him like a very low frequency that his chest recognized even if his ears could barely track it. Afterward, in a side chamber off the main hall, with the distant sounds of the assembly dispersing beyond the closed doors, Soren found Cole standing near the window. He was not in the formal attire of the ceremony anymore. He had changed quickly, the way people do when they want to have a real conversation, and formal clothing makes real conversations harder. He looked, in this quieter setting, much like the calm young dragon who had sat on the stool in Cole's shop late at night and talked about things that mattered to him. He stood in front of Cole for a moment without speaking. Then he reached into the inner pocket of the plain garment he was wearing and took out something small. He held it out. Cole looked down at his open palm. It was the toy warship. The one he had repaired 11 years ago in his shop on a slow afternoon. It was in perfect condition, the deep blue paint still rich, the gold markings clean and bright, the repaired front section holding without any sign of the original break. It had been kept with the kind of care that people reserve for things that are genuinely irreplaceable. Cole looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Soren. I kept it, Soren said simply. Every year. Every place I went. It came with me. He paused. It was the first thing that ever taught me that broken does not mean worthless. Cole closed his fingers around the toy carefully. He did not have words that felt equal to the moment, so he did not try to find them. He just nodded, slowly, and Soren seemed to understand that completely. Before Cole left, Soren pressed a second object into his hands, a small engraved stand of dark Veiltheri metal, and mounted on it the royal crest of the new Dragon King, cast in deep bronze. A personal gift, Soren told him. Not a political gesture. Not a formality. Something made specifically, with his name worked into the base in letters that were, Cole noticed with a quiet warmth he could not explain, very slightly uneven. He came back to Valdra's Cross on a Thursday. His shop was exactly as he had left it. Pip was at the front counter, reorganizing the small parts shelf for what Cole estimated was probably the 5th time this month. Fun was in the back, working on a sensor calibration with the careful concentration he had been developing nicely over the past year. The tools were in their places. The kettle was on. Cole set his bag down, unwrapped the royal crest carefully, and placed it on the corner of his main workbench where the light from the lamp would catch it. He stood back and looked at it for a moment. Pip came around from the counter, looked at the crest, and looked at Cole. What does it mean? Pip asked. Cole looked at the deep bronze of the crest, at his own name worked into the base in those slightly uneven letters, at the toy warship sitting beside it that he had placed there without quite deciding to. He picked up his tools, pulled his stool close to the workbench and sat down. It means somebody remembered, he said. And he got back to work.